Good evening and welcome to Philippine Geographical Society Lecture Series 2021. This is the seventh lecture series that we are conducting this year. The PGS LS is a project collaboration between the Philippine Geographical Society and the UP Department of Geography. For this session, we are joined by the UP Department of Anthropology in sponsoring this event. My name is Kathy Illustre and I will be the moderator for this particular session. Before we proceed, please allow me to iterate a few of our house rules. During the presentation, attendees will be on mute, but we encourage you to interact with the online community attending this session by typing your questions and comments in the chat box or through our social media accounts in Twitter and Facebook. Questions will be addressed during the open forum. This lecture is being simultaneously streamed in the UP Department of Geography YouTube channel. Also, please note that this meeting is being recorded and will be made available for viewing after the event. And just to give you a heads up, we will be taking a group photo before we end the meeting. So please be ready to turn on your video for that activity. To give the opening remarks, I would like to call Professor Eman Garcia, President of the Philippine Geographical Society.
Thank you, Ma'am Cathy. Good evening, everyone. Welcome once again to another episode of the PGS Lecture Series for 2021. On behalf of the Philippine Geographical Society and the UP Department of Geography, I am delighted to welcome everyone in this evening's lecture. The PGS Lecture Series is part of our objectives to promote the geography to promote geography in lieu of the actual National Conference on Geographical Studies, which we conduct annually. Through this, we hope to highlight the different geographic research being done by our fellow geographers and allies in the field. In this lecture series, our invited speaker is a close ally from the UP Department of Anthropology. Our speaker will focus on the functions of cultural memory in the context of disaster resilience. Entitled Cultural Memory for Disaster Risk Reduction, the talk delves into the importance of remembering disasters and the ways in which societies remember. As is customary to our previous lectures, we did a word cloud of the keywords derived from our online registration. And in this lecture, the dominant words include collective, heritage, shared, relevant, past, and history. We also see words such as powerful, memories, identity, symbolic, and several others, which altogether make it a good mix of what we hope we could be covered in this evening's talk. On this note, I again would like to thank everyone for joining us today. And as always, I hope we have a very special and productive evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Eman. And now, I am pleased to introduce our speaker for this lecture. Dr. Soledad Dalisay is a professor at the UP Department of Anthropology. Her research interests lie at the nexus of cultural ecologies of health, anthropologies of disaster, and gender and sexuality. She served as the first faculty coordinator of the UP Office of Anti-Sexual Harassment for 6 years from 2008 to 2014. Her latest publication is entitled Intangible Cultural Heritage, which is part of the International Research Center for Intangible Cultural Heritage in the Asia-Pacific region under the auspice of UNESCO. Please give a warm welcome to Professor Sol Dalisay.
Thank you, Kathy. And I'd like also to thank particularly Joseph for inviting me here. It's an opportunity for me to reconnect with your department, because I've worked with some of you before, Simads particularly, in one of the research projects, which was also a turning point for me kasi doon na mas lumalim yung aking interest in doing disaster studies in anthropology. Yeah. So siguro umpisahan na natin para hindi masyado mag-take ng time. Mag-share screen na ako.
So, pwede mo rin tanggalin yung video mo kasi naglalag
yeah.
ka na pa to.
Thank you. Oo, kasi naglalag ako. Ano ko ba tatanggalin? Yan, sige. So, yan. So, everyone can see the slides?
Yes.
So, it's about cultural memory and disaster. Actually, medyo simple lang yung ating discussion. But siguro if I may share some why I went into this type of study, ito yung isang inspiring message from Japan. It's an old Japanese saying, one of what we will call as intangible cultural heritage. And it says a disaster always hits when the last one is forgotten. So this saying underscores the importance of memory in disaster resilience, diba? And also siguro may personal meron din ako mga personal memories, no, which I'll share with you today that inspired me to work further in disaster memory. Kasi when we were doing our field work in Tacloban for the Yolanda study, kasama ko nga doon si Mads, no? One of our informants in the FGD said na ang natatakot daw siya, meron siyang fear that maulit yung Yolanda disaster. Kasi yung mga susunod na henerasyon daw who have not experienced the disaster might forget, and therefore they will go back to their old complacent ways. Kaya dito inarticulate niya kung gaano kahalaga din yung pag-aalala and memory of a disaster. Okay. So these are what we're going to discuss this evening. First of all, look at the importance of remembering disasters, particularly in the context of disaster risk reduction, ways in which societies remember disasters. Then we go into cultural memory. Ito yung main topic natin. We'll define it. And we'll look into cultural memory in the context of living heritage, or what we call as intangible cultural heritage, and we'll provide some examples. We'll also be discussing some of the issues in remembering, because even memories are also politicized. Yeah. And then future directions, for particularly in research in disasters, in memory and disaster studies. Kasi some of you, I hope, would also be encouraged to go into research on memory. I know many of you are already into disaster studies, mga experts na kayo dyan. But sana you'll also go into cultural memory in relation to disaster. Yeah. So, teka, parang hindi ko makita yung slides. Sorry.
Why the need to remember disaster?
Okay, yan. Natatakpan kasi nitong itong nandito sa taas. Anyway, thank you, Joseph, for prompting me. So why is there a need to remember? Why is there a need for remembering or memory in disaster study? First of all, remembering and commemorating can be cathartic to many individuals or groups of people. Medyo caution lang dito kasi there are some, of course, who, when they relive the memories, they experience trauma. But trauma is also a part of memory in disaster studies. Yan. So merong isang group of researchers who are looking into trauma and re-traumatization in these types of studies. Kasi minsan, di ba, merong ganong experience, no? And we're trying to avoid that. But in many instances, it's cathartic to talk about your experience kasi parang release yun ng ng tension because you're able to share your painful experiences. Memories of disaster also contain valuable lessons kasi nga here you're able to learn how other people in the past have coped, how they've survived some of the disasters, and therefore there are valuable lessons that can be learned here and transmitted not only vertically from one generation to another, but also intragenerationally through your social networks. Yan. So relaying memories can also result into relaying valuable lessons. Memories become a shared past that can fortify group identity. Kasi when something is shared, diba, it strengthens the bond of a group of people. And it can lead to the development of strong social capital that may spur collective action in a positive sense in the future. Yan. Kasi ito na yung iyong social network ngayon. Yan. And memory has the potential for increasing risk awareness, which builds resilience towards future encounters with disaster. Through the narration of stories, narratives from memory, we're aware of the risks that we face, when we meet hazards, and therefore we can act in a more positive way once we know about how we should act as a collective and also appropriately. Now, this is a photo of the rock slab in Aneyoshi, Japan. Hindi ko alam, I'm not sure if you've already encountered this in the news or in some of your readings. Remember the 2011 tsunami and earthquake, no? So in many of the coastal areas in Japan, it's not only in Aneyoshi, but in other coastal areas as well, they had similar rock slabs like this. And I'm not sure, maybe someone can read Japanese, pero ito daw yung sinasabi dito sa rock slab. High dwellings are the peace and harmony of our descendants. Remember the calamity of the great tsunamis. Do not build homes below this point. So legend says that these rock slabs were built in 1896 after Aneyoshi was devastated by a tsunami. Pero may mga nagsasabi din, because there are contestations to that legend. There are also say that it was built after the 1933 tsunami, when the village on the coastal area was moved to uphill. So doon daw nalagay o natayo itong mga rock slabs na ito. But anyway, Aneyoshi in 2011, after or before the tsunami, they were already heeding the lesson that was shared through the rock slab, and they did not build below these rock slabs where they were erected. But there were other areas within Japan na nakalimutan na, they forgot about the lesson that the rock slabs were relaying, and because of the need for space, communities were building below these rock slabs, and these communities were the ones that were hard hit by the tsunami. But Aneyoshi was apparently, according to the stories, safe kasi they heeded the lesson in the rock slab. So that's one example. The rock slabs were built on the memory of the earlier tsunamis, and they were able to warn the succeeding generations. Okay. So flood markers are also types of warnings. The one on the left is on Marikina River. So this is more for warning rather than for people to remember, but it provides information. First alarm daw pag 15 nandito sa level na ito yung water on Marikina River, and then second alarm na to, then you have to kailangan na nilang lumisan. This picture on the right is a historical record of flooding in Passau, a city in Germany, near the Austrian border. So makikita nyo, di medyo malabo lang yung photo kasi it's quite small, but it shows the different years and the height of the flood during that year. So from here, you see this one's on the higher levels, height na niya yung arc, and this is about more than 6 feet tall. So yan yung ano, no? Which shows the history of flooding and tells people na there was this type of flooding before, and so we have to be careful whenever there's a flood because you can reach this level or even higher. Let's look now at the individual memory and collective memory nexus, because some of the authors have tried to differentiate between individual memory, collective memory, and even communicative memory, which we'll be going into in a while. No? So while there is, of course, individual memory, these memories, individual memories, are often framed within the owner's personality and life experiences. But because individuals act within a group, they're able to maintain memories that are of interest to that group. In other words, memories are also social and framed by our social interaction with other groups of people. So collective memories or remembrances are hinged on individual memories, but it will be difficult for one to find content or meaning in our individual memories if you cannot relate with other individuals within your group. Also, memories and emotions are often entangled, and remembering may elicit emotional highs and lows. So, di ba, when we try to remember things that happened in our lives, this can evoke feelings of happiness or feelings of loneliness. Nostalgia is the feeling that's often associated with memories. Kaya it's very difficult to disentangle memories and emotions. When we talk about memories, it's inevitable that we also talk about the emotions that are associated with our memory. Communicative memory, this was proposed by Jan Assmann. He said it's limited to the recent past. Unlike collective memory or cultural memory, which is hinged on the deep past, communicative memory is referring to recent past experiences. It elicits personal memories, and it does not require expert knowledge for the transmitters. Later on, I'll discuss why some of what we call as cultural memory is lodged or embodied on what we call as experts in culture. Okay? So it's also important to move from remembering to commemoration, because commemoration entails shared meaning and affect, and it becomes more powerful. Powerful in moving individuals to work towards a common goal. Like for instance, to save not only themselves, but other members of their group in instances of disaster. It may incorporate rituals that you enact as a group, and through the recognition of material objects as remembrances or mnemonic devices, you share your experiences. Commemoration entails shared experiences, and therefore memories in this context are embedded or situated in collective action. Also, collective memory and commemoration is more formalized. It's characterized by memorialization, kaya we have the memorials, diba? And recurrence. So in other words, meron ng element of repetition in commemoration, which is different from individual memory alone. And oftentimes the repetition is with revision, because you also make adjustments in the way you commemorate depending upon the current social situation. Necessity constructs memory, and often we remember, no, what we need to remember. And cultural enactments of the past are conceived in the present and they serve present interest. Okay? So, in other words, there is a function to that, to a particular event. That's why we remember it or we commemorate it. Okay, so let's go now into cultural memory. Cultural memory um, refers to our experiences and how we pass them on to others, how we share such memory with others within our own generation and through the generations downwards, through our stories, our games, our holidays, and our traditions. So ito na yung context ng culture. Okay? And cultural memory brings to the fore the memory and social-cultural context interface. Yeah, so always we go into the social-cultural context in defining our cultural memory. Remembering is metaphorically transferred to the level of culture. So what are these different elements? We'll go into that in a while. Memory is also represented in media and institutions, and they have to be actualized as a way of remembering. Okay? Without the actualizations, the memories will not have long-lasting impact. So it has to be acted out. It has to be done in many different ways in our culture. Meaning is also created through social discourse. That's why cultural memory is also social memory. And it's critical to the remembrance, performance, and maintenance of the performance of memories. In other words, performance of memory is similar to commemoration, and that's what's important in cultural memory as well. Okay. Memories are embedded in a sense of place. No? So we always refer to our memories as events that occurred in a particular place and in a particular time. Knowledge, expectation, and resilience become part of understanding the place, and it becomes potentially an aspect of community identity. Belonging to a community entails remembering the norms, the rules one must follow, what is acceptable in our community, what is not acceptable, what we need to know as a member of a cultural group, what we have to remember. Okay? Built heritage are some of the objects, they are tangible objects that remind us of particular things that are important in our history and in our culture. They serve as mnemonic devices or reminders of the past. They instigate the act of remembrance. When we see a particular object, for instance, or monument or any object of material culture, it reminds us of certain things that are important in our culture. They instigate the act of remembrance. Diba? Sometimes we have pictures, we have certain objects that serve as souvenirs, and when we encounter these objects, they bring back memories of the time when we acquired that object. Okay? Therefore, because of the importance of built heritage or the artifacts that we have in remembering, there's a need for commemorative practices or to commemorate through the built heritage. Yeah, so isang example yung Kagsawa Church that was buried in hindi naman destroyed daw, but not necessarily buried in February 14, the volcanic eruption. It was through the years daw that the Kagsawa Church was buried, but it was definitely destroyed in 1814. And so when we see the Kagsawa Church, it reminds us of that event in 1814 when the volcano erupted and caused so much devastation in that area at that time. Okay? And it also reminds us that this can happen again. And then this marker in Padang, in Albay, it also commemorates Reming, that very strong and devastating typhoon in 2011. May marker siya here that tells of the event at that time, how much was destroyed and how many lives were lost. Yeah. So these are reminders of disasters in the past. And of course, Yolanda in 2013. These are monuments, quote unquote, that have been erected in the sites where the storm surge had caused so much devastation. Hindi na nila tinanggal yung ship that was pushed inwards, and people can go there, have their picture, part of disaster tourism, another way of remembering. So both built and living heritage, when we talk about built heritage, we talk about the tangible aspects of heritage. And when we talk about living heritage, we talk about intangible aspects, are vital in remembering and commemorating disasters. We said earlier, they serve as vital mnemonic devices. So living heritage, we'll go now into living heritage or intangible cultural heritage. And this is the official UNESCO definition. This is the area where I did some research, for the IRC, as was mentioned. So intangible cultural heritage includes the practices, representations, expressions, knowledge, skills, instruments, objects, artifacts, cultural spaces that are associated with that communities, groups, and in some cases, individuals, especially the artisans, recognized as part of their cultural heritage. So intangible cultural heritage is transmitted from generation to generation. This is important in cultural memory, the transmission from one generation to the next. And it's constantly recreated in response to their environment. So in other words, if there are changes in the environment, people respond by also adjusting or making adjustments in their living heritage. So it also tells you about how people in the past have interacted with nature. It provides living heritage or intangible cultural heritage provides a group of people with a sense of identity. You belong to a certain cultural group, and heritage. It also provides them with a sense of continuity, and it promotes the respect for cultural diversity and human creativity. So these are the different domains, and we'll go into some of these later. So it includes oral traditions and expressions, including language, because in anthropology, of course, language is one of a core area, and we also recognize language as culture, not just a way of transmitting culture, but it is culture. Performing arts, social practices, rituals, and festive events, including local knowledge and practices, and also traditional crafts. Yeah, so let's look at some of the impacts of living heritage on hazards. Living heritage on hazards and disasters. So they serve as early warning. Like I'm not sure if some of you are familiar with the legend of the 7 rollers among the Moken in Thailand. So the story of the Moken and how they were able to survive the tsunami in 2004, if I'm not mistaken. That actually brought to the limelight the value of local knowledge in disaster risk reduction. So the Moken had this legend, which they call the legend of the 7 rollers in the lagoon, and it served as some sort of early warning system for them, because the legend tells of signs of a coming tsunami, and also where to go, no, within their traditional area where they live for safety. So the Moken at that time were not only able to save themselves, but they were also able to save tourists that they were guiding, because they served as tourist guides, no, in Thailand. So meron silang mga gina-guide na tourists, and even those tourists were also saved from the tsunami. There's also the legend of the Smoham, the people in the island in Indonesia, also the same hazard, the tsunami at that time, no? The Indian Ocean tsunami. And you also have traditional ways of communicating risk, like the use of bandilyo in the Dinagat Islands. Hindi ko alam kung familiar kayo dito, but when I was in Dinagat Island, people there were telling me that they use the bandilyo as a system in disseminating information of all kinds, not just disaster risk information, no? But they were able to use this to disseminate information of coming typhoon, and therefore people were forewarned. No? They were able to move to safer areas and to prepare their valuables para hindi siya binabaha o tinatangay ng malakas na hangin. Bandilyo, by the way, ito yung house-to-house na spread of information. So, traditionally, meron yang ina-assign sa community na tagadala ng balita, no? But nowadays, they use yung mga kagawad within the barangay to spread the information. So that's a bandilyo in Dinagat Islands. There are also the message runners in Dicopia, and traditionally they have this role, no? They're called the message runner. They have a very important role in Dicopia, which is to disseminate information, which are important for the pieces of information that are important to the group. Like for instance, pagka may fiesta or community event, no? Na pwede nilang ikasaya, and also to spread the information or news about an incoming typhoon, like the bandilyo in the Dinagat Island. Yeah. So these are traditional ways that can be used even nowadays, no, to improve on disaster resilience. And now, yung impact ng hazards on living heritage can be quite grave. First of all, there's the threat of the disappearance of our living heritage, like the loss of materials that are used in the crafts. There are some cultural groups who've complained about losing yung mga weeds and the reeds that they use in weaving mats. Wala na daw yun kasi nga nasasalanta sila ng bagyo. There's also the death of respected knowledge bearers or community leaders or champions. And therefore, the skill is important na ma-pass on nila, no, to the younger generations. But if there's no one who's interested or willing to take on the craft, wala na. Mamamatay na yung living heritage na yun. The death of respected knowledge bearers. And there's also, I also observed this in the field, no? The emergence of new narratives or reconfiguration of knowledge and related rituals and practices to adapt to newer hazards or strengths of hazards that they've never experienced before. Okay? Yeah, so I'll give you now some examples based on my research of some of the religious rites and rituals, local knowledge, new narratives in old legends, community-wide commemorative activities that I've encountered working in the field on disaster and memory. So first of all, itong mga religious rites and rituals. And this is the Festival of the Nuestra Señora de Salvacion in Tiwi Albay. As her name connotes, the Nuestra Señora de Salvacion, or Our Lady of Salvation. So when we brought our students for their field school, traditional field school in Horoan, in Tiwi Albay, and we encountered a lot of their stories of disasters, and the lady was always implicated in their stories. She's a very popular patroness. Madami siyang mga deboto, no? And even those who were not in Albay, they would go to Albay during her feast day to pay homage to the lady. Her image is situated on a hill, and her back is towards the mountain, but she faces a body of water. So ang kwento ng mga nandun is that strategic yung positioning ng lady. She watches over the sea or the body of water. I think it's a river, malaking river siya, because ito yung nagdadala ng ibang disaster within Tiwi. Pag nag-overflow siya, then it causes flooding. Pag bumagyo, nagpa-flooding din siya. So may mga namamatay doon dahil malalim tong river na to. And it causes so much devastation sa mga kabahayan. But her back is towards the mountain because protected yung village, no, Horoan, by the mountain from the strong winds of the typhoons that pass through their area. Kaya ang binabantayan niya talaga ay yung katubigan. So that's the story of the Nuestra Señora de Salvacion. I know of some faculty members in Diliman who also are devotees of the Nuestra Señora de Salvacion. And then, if any one of you is from Batangas, you're probably aware of the lady, Our Lady of Kaysasay. Yeah. So another very powerful and supposedly miraculous image of the Virgin Mary. Nung last na Taal volcano eruption in January 2020 yata yun, ano? Maraming mga kwento na nag-emerge of how the lady had again saved many lives against the volcanic eruption of Taal. They have a practice that they call the pagluluwa. It's actually a prayer procession wherein the image or copies of the image, because the original image is hindi na nila nilalabas yan, no? Nasa shrine siya sa basilica, because the minor basilica, kasi syempre it's a very old image. I think 300 years old na siya. Therefore, ginagamit nila yung mga replicas ng image, but people believe that these replicas are as powerful as the original Our Lady of Kaysasay. So the pagluluwa is a prayer for intercession by the lady for troubles that people are experiencing. Pwede itong mga kung iba-iba, no? It can be an illness, it can be economic losses, but most especially it's used to help people against disasters. And there was a time wherein the people living in San Nicolas, Batangas, they were experiencing tremors, which they consider as signs of impending volcanic eruption ng Taal, kasi ang San Nicolas is situated just across Taal volcano. Ang naghihiwalay lang sa kanila ay yung Taal Lake. So malaki ang epekto sa kanila ng volcanic eruption ng Taal. And nung nakaka-experience sila ng mga tremors na to, no, there were small or low intensity earthquakes. They rescheduled the pagluluwa or the procession. Kasi normally ginagawa ito in December. But I think it was April at that time but because they were experiencing the tremors, they did the pagluluwa. So you see here a reconfiguration of a tradition which is normally done. Kasi ang rituals calendrical yan. They do it once a year on a particular time of the year, but they had to do it twice for that year because they felt that they needed the intercession of the lady. So yeah, no? So you see how culture is reconfigured because people feel the need for it. Okay. Ito yung iba't ibang klase ng local knowledge din. No? In predicting storm, for instance. So you have animal behavior, before the volcanic eruption daw, no? Again, in Tiwi Albay, sabi ng mga residents, makikita daw nila yung na nagpupulasan ang mga daga at ahas. So there's so many daga and ahas around, scampering around, and that to them was a sign na baka pumutok, especially when it's associated with smoke coming out of the Mayon volcano, ay sign daw yun, napuputok na ang Mayon. Yeah. There are also signs from the constellations. Fisher folk, especially the maestro fisher folk, they know a lot about this. This is what we mean by experts in the community as bearers of the knowledge. Because not everyone have the same level of experience of the sea as the maestro fisher folk. So some of the signs from the constellations are yung halo around the sun. Yan, yung nakikita dito sa picture na to, no? So the halo around the sun signifies rainfall within the next 24 hours. So nung nasa Tacloban kami ni Mads, nabanggit ito ng mga elderly. Sabi nilang ganon, nakita daw nila yan. But because such type of local knowledge was known only by the elderly, hindi na masyadong napansin yan. So, pero alam daw nila yun. And then, meron din yung tinatawag na beehive configuration of the stars. Pagka yun, you normally see this. Pero pagka daw hindi mo makita yan, that means a storm is approaching. Marami rin mga kwento or narratives about eclipse. Yan, that's a very popular element of legends also. So last night, we were supposed to have experienced that. And I wonder what else it's supposed to tell us. And then signs from the physical environment. Yun daw, ay si Ma'am Darlene, baka alam niya yan. No? Yun daw pag basta na lang nalalaglag yung dahon ng saging, may ibig sabihin daw yan. No? Okay. And it's a sign of some weather disturbance that's coming. You also find some new narratives in old legends. This one, I encountered the story of Sam Ryan. I'm not sure if some of you know about this legend, no, ni Sam Ryan in Homonhon. Again, when I was doing fieldwork in D1 for the Yolanda project, si David Garcia told me about Sam Ryan, and I became interested, and I actually interviewed people, even in Homonhon, no, the island of Homonhon, about the legend of Sam Ryan. So the story is that Sam Ryan is an individual. Ginagamit ko yung Sam Ryan, but iba-iba yung terminology na ginagamit in the area. So some say Samarayan, some say Sam Ryan, but I'd like to use the term Sam Ryan kasi personalized yung legend na to personified rather yung legend na to. So there's an individual and he's supposed to be Sam Ryan. He resides, his kingdom is in Homonhon. So this is the picture of the mountain where his kingdom is supposed to be. Yan. So yung forests ng Homonhon, nandun daw yung kingdom ni Sam Ryan. And yung some of the older research participants, nung ginagawa ko yung field research para dito, were telling me na the story has been around since time immemorial. Hindi na nila matukoy exactly when it started or who started it. No? But ever since, ito yung mga kausap ko, they're around 60, past 60, almost 70. They said that they were still very young and they were already told about the story of Sam Ryan. Maliliit pa daw sila. So Sam Ryan is supposed to be an individual that no one has seen or interacted with. In fact, pag nakausap mo daw si Sam Ryan, mamamatay ka. Yan, yun yung sinasabi nila. And at night, when there are lights, no, remember, this is a 60-plus-year-old individual na nagkikwento sa akin ito. In the evening daw, they would see lights flickering where his kingdom is supposed to be. And the elders, yung mga matatanda, sasabihan na yung mga bata na, oh, pumasok na kayo. Andyan si Sam Ryan. So his part of the narrative of Sam Ryan is also to discipline young children. Yan, para sumunod sila sa matatanda. Yun. But as time went on, ang Homonhon kasi before was very difficult. Even now, it's quite difficult to reach Homonhon Island. You have to live the island, for instance, going back to Giwan, before 2 p.m. Kasi pag inabot ka na ng 2 p.m., delikado na yung dagat. No? So that's what we were told. Doon ka na matulog sa sa isla pagka inabot ka na ng 2 p.m. Yun, no? But there was a time when it was even more difficult to traverse the portion of the sea, no, from Giwan to Homonhon Island, kasi hindi pa ganoon ka-develop ang mga bangka or yung motorized boats na naman ang ginagamit eh. Pero yun nga, no, mahirap. And then limited ang schedule kasi kahit yung mga may-ari ng mga bangka na to, very careful din sila. Yun, dahil nga maraming mga incident na nag-sink yung mga bangka dyan or boat doon. So Homonhon Island has been a mystery for a long time. And the people in Homonhon Island, they were cut off from Giwan. Like mga communities dyan for a long period of time. Feeling nga nila, when I was talking to them, feeling nila mas developed culturally yung mga nasa Iwan kesa sa kanila. And it's also a very poor community in Homonhon Island. Kaya bihira sa kanila yung nakakapag-aral noon. And then, quite recently, nagkaroon ng mga minahan dyan sa Homonhon. So, ilan yung mga minahan dyan? There's Tech Iron, there's Mount Sinai, pero hindi nasara na yata yung yun. Maraming mga, I think they're chromite and nickel mines. See? Isa nga itong nandito sa foreground na to, ng picture, ng nasara na mina dyan. And the mining companies provided shuttle service for their workers and the community to get to Giwan and back several times in the day. They also, through their social development and management program, built schools. Marami silang developments na ginawa, roads, ganyan. And so Giwan was not, Homonhon Island was not so isolated anymore. And so nandun pa rin naman yung kwento ni Sam Ryan, pero hindi na daw ganun ka-popular as before. Wala na rin masyadong naniniwala dun sa mga news, especially those who are situated in Giwan itself. Until Yolanda struck in 2013, no? Yan. So, nung dumating si Yolanda, maraming bagong kwento tungkol kay Sam Ryan. Okay, so meron yung mga stories of of relief goods na hindi naman sinasabi kung kanino galing. Meron ding stories ng mga blood bags na dinala sa Homonhon Island. And the popular story is that hindi mo dapat tatanggapin yan kasi kay Sam Ryan galing yan. No? So you should not have anything to do with Sam Ryan. Otherwise, you will die. Yan. And the story was that the nurse who received the blood bags in the Homonhon Community Hospital, eventually she died. Yon. So, lalong na-reinforce yung story. So, may mga bago no, na additions to the legend of Sam Ryan post-disaster. So, you see how disasters or hazards, particularly the devastating ones, no, can contribute to the generation of narratives in legends like that of Sam Ryan. Okay, so sabi natin important din yung commemoration because it keeps the memory alive. Yeah. So these are examples of some of the Yolanda commemorative activities. See, as late as 2019, hindi ko lang alam nung 2020 kung merong event na ganito kasi COVID na nga, di ba? But you have concert, you have the candle lighting. I think some of our researchers, when we were doing our work in Tacloban City, nakaparticipate pa sila dito sa candle lighting na ito. Okay? Of course, there are also issues in remembering. Like for instance, there is variance in memory, especially in individual memory, and the meaning among individuals across time and place. I remember when one of the, when I read news about plane crashes. Uy, may plane crash. Ganyan. Nung nag-crash ang Malaysian Airlines, kawawa naman. Ganon, no? And then there was one plane crash when a fellow anthropologist was in that plane and died. Iba yung impact sa akin noon, syempre, because there was someone I knew and I interacted with, unlike any of the other plane crashes I learned about. No? So, in other disasters, when a very close loved one is lost, iba yung impact nun sa'yo, no? Compared with kapitbahay mo o yung kaya in the next town na apektuhan. So there is variance in memory and meaning across individuals and across time. And sometimes it makes it difficult now for commemoration. Diba? What are you going to commemorate? Are you commemorating the right event? Diba? Are you sharing the same meaning with most of the individuals you want to reach with a commemorative event? Also, memories evolve. It may vary, the meaning may vary within an individual's lifetime. Sabi nga, time heals all wounds. And therefore, the memory of a particular typhoon or devastating hazard may be watered down through time. Okay? Memories may transform and fade away. No? Nakakalungkot yung mga ganitong usapin. No? Forgetting may diminish resilient knowledge and social learning. You see, here, commemoration is important. But there are also politics of remembering and commemoration. Who says what we should remember and who says what we should actively forget? Because there are also actions for active forgetting, like as there are actions or activities for active remembering. And of course, the pain of remembering may sometimes be a hindrance for commemoration. Kasi nga, very traumatic yung experience for some individuals or some groups of people. But if I may share some of the what we can do, no, for future research in memory and disaster. First, the need to find out ways to which elements of culture can sustain memories of disaster for DRR and to document this in various cultural contexts. Kasi nga, it can be culture specific also, di ba? Is it effective to yung mga ginawa nila sa Yolanda na nandun yung ship, nandun yung parang statue in front of the Astrodome, no? So, pare-pareho ba kayo ng remember? Yeah, if you use these symbols, because symbols may have different meanings also. So it's important that we find out ways through which culture can sustain memories of disaster in different contexts. And the need to document how memories of disaster contribute to sustaining a resilient culture. So it's not just documenting the ways of how to sustain memories of disaster, but also particularly to sustain a resilient culture. Okay? So paano natin maha-harness ang memory to help us save lives against deadly hazards in the future? Okay? So these are some of the future directions we can take. Okay, so I'd like to end with this slide. Pangit na nga, hindi ako makahanap ng mas magandang slide. You're familiar with this, di ba? Never again, never forget. So I think this phrase says exactly what we want to say in this presentation. Not to forget the disasters with the aim of these disasters never occurring again. Okay, so maraming salamat.
Thank you, Professor Dalisay, for a very informative talk on cultural memory and how having these memories and living heritage could serve as early warning and communicate disaster risks to the community. For our attendees, we encourage you to type in your questions in the Zoom chat box and in our social media accounts if you are one of those watching in our YouTube channel. So we will now proceed to the open forum. Professor Dalisay, when you talk about living heritage, it gives a sense that the knowledge keeper is someone who is a senior member of the community. Is there an instance where someone relatively young has this kind of knowledge or cultural memory?
Sorry, naglag ka.
Aha.
Not all forms of knowledge naman are lodged within the what we call as experts. Meron din naman yung mga everyday knowledge that are being taught to the young children, no? Because they are important in their everyday lives. Like for instance, yung ibang mga signs from the environment, the animal signs. These are common forms of knowledge that are circulated within the community. Yung mga specialist knowledge na tinatawag natin, ito yung nakalodge sa mga experts. Normally, in the senior members of the community kasi they have acquired such knowledge through the years by working on a special area like for instance fishing o kaya in traditional medicine, and therefore you gain knowledge from them by apprenticeship or vicarious learning, not necessarily being taught to you as a like what we learn in classroom. So ito yung mga nakalodge dun sa more elderly and senior members of society. Yeah. Some are even secret knowledge, no? Hindi mo talaga basta-basta ma-acquire yan. So ito yung ilan sa mga specialist knowledge na tinatawag natin.
Okay.
But not everything, no? Some knowledge you learn in doing
And then
things
meron,
in your everyday life as a member of a particular culture.
okay. Thank you po. Meron din po bang instances where the cultural memory has been changed to fit the current situation of a particular culture? For instance, yung effects ng globalization, modernization.
Yes, ang isang example dyan, no, when we were doing fieldwork in Batanes, we accompanied some of our students in Batanes. So Maria Mangahas wrote about Matao fishing, right? I know some of you may be familiar with that. But then, of course, we have the encroachment of the Taiwanese fishers in the traditional fishing grounds of the Batanes fishers. So nagko-compete na ngayon yung mga Ibatan fishers natin with the Taiwanese fishers. And so they had to make some adjustments in their local knowledge about fishing. So meron silang mga restrictions certain times of the year that they should not fish, no? But then they had to make adjustments there kasi nauunahan sila ng mga Taiwanese. Wala na silang fish during the traditional time that they go fishing. So they had to make some changes in the schedule, even changes in the type of fish that they fish as part of being the Matao fishers in Batanes. So that's one example. There are others in the literature, in the anthropological literature.
And then, syempre ngayon, uso na yung mga social media, digital technologies. How does the social media and other digital technologies impact naman cultural memory? Were there instances wherein they use the digital technologies to recall cultural memory and mobilize the community during disasters?
Okay, that's a very interesting question, and that's an important question kasi even the scholars of intangible cultural heritage or living heritage, medyo divided ang position nila when it comes to digital technology, social media, and intangible cultural heritage. Siyempre, meron yung mga conservativists. They prefer the more traditional way of transmission of knowledge, no? Especially in craft making. You learn through apprenticeship, you learn from a master, and there are this group of more, anong tawag mo dito? Merong term na ginagamit dyan they're more, not necessarily advanced, but they are, the term will come to my mind, no? Pero sila yung mas revolutionary, quote unquote, in the methods of looking at intangible cultural heritage. And they say that if we do not allow these new technologies to help us in advancing methods in doing the traditional arts and crafts, for instance, these arts and crafts are going to die. So there are those who advocate na let's allow the popularization of such traditional crafts through the use of modern digital technologies.
Okay. Ang interesting po talaga ng topic ninyo. And then, there's a similar...
May I add pa? There's one who even has developed a computer program in computer program to simulate the making of the weaves in Mindanao, yung tinalak. So may mga ganon. Kaya lang syempre may mga mas conservative and hindi masyadong decide sa paggamit ng technology in advancing intangible cultural knowledge.
Mm-hmm. And then, yung ating mga cultural memory, no, mga living heritage, can somehow merge into scientific knowledge. Would you know of existing partnerships or studies or efforts being conducted by the NDRRMC or other government institutions with respect to the integration of the traditional and also the scientific knowledge on disasters?
Okay. Hindi na tayo lalabas ng UP. Professor Mel Luna, si Ma'am Darlene and myself, and Maria Mangahas, were participants in the work that they did on validating indigenous knowledge and through science. So we attended a forum one time. We worked together with marine biologists, meteorologists. It was a very interesting gathering because there were people in the sciences and people from the social sciences like ourselves trying to figure out local knowledge and which have science basis in science and which have not. Of course, doon din ako naka-encounter ng sinabihan ako na ang pag-uusapan lang natin dito ay yung may basis in science, hindi yung mere superstition. Yun. Siyempre, medyo may reaction on our end kasi we said that it's the responsibility of the people in science to find the basis for traditional knowledge. No? But we recognize the value of traditional knowledge. We believe it is ethno-science, and therefore it has its equivalences, if you may call it that, in science. Merong mga pag-aaral na ganun. And they have a publication. I'll try to find the kung ano yung citation ng publication na yan.
Ayan. And then there's a question in the chat box from Junel Labor from the communication, who is a communication research. And he was just wondering if you have uncovered in your research how cultural memory formation develops from a small group decision to a community event to a socially accepted form of memory.
Okay, sige. So hindi ko pa nako-cover yan sa aking research. But siguro yung idea ng socially acceptable is a bit contentious, no? Like what I was saying earlier about the politics of memory and knowledge, no? Sino ba yung mag-a-accept at sino yung hindi mag-a-accept, no? So how do you say that a particular memory or disaster should be accepted, and who should accept that? No, there are certain elites that try to exert dominance and they push for because they have certain agenda for a certain memory to be the dominant memory in that particular group. So, yun yung isa sa mga issues that we have to contend with. This process is rooted yung ano ba yung i-commemorate natin at ano hindi. No? It's rooted with politics. I tell you.
Yeah. Nandun yan sa isang slide ninyo kanina, no?
Yes.
How the memories can be influenced by politics. The other question also is, can the cultural memory be manipulated? And if so, paano siya usually na ma-manipulate?
Alin yon?
Yung cultural memory, can it be
Cultural
manipulated? And possibly if it can be, paano siyang pwedeng ma-manipulate?
Paano siya pwedeng ma-manipulate or how? Natatakot ako sa word na manipulate. But you mean how would you be able to use cultural memory for
your own purposes? Parang sa geography, parang sa geography, parang I'm looking at this question sa geography. There is a whole conversation about how you can use maps for propaganda. This is something similar to that naman. The use of cultural memory to gain something na, kumaga, meron kang vested interest, may iba kang agenda. Oo.
So you can always popularize a particular memory, no? By those who are in power, for instance, like for instance, yung mga historical revisionism, yung mga yan, no, these are examples of using memory for a particular agenda. Yeah.
Okay. And then we have a question from Ben Paulo Valenzuela. He wrote that he was wondering
how adaptive disaster memory can be used when it comes to future or scientific uncertainty. And then he writes, na yung context nun is that in his field work in Japan, there were instances that the local memory or knowledge of tsunamis actually worked against the community.
Baka gusto niyang mag-elaborate on how the knowledge of the tsunamis worked against the community.
Sure. Sorry.
Yeah, okay.
Hi, Ben.
Hi. Yeah, actually, I like the work that you're doing. So right now, actually, I've been looking at like the role of disaster memory in a lot of things. But just the context for this question, kasi so that Great Tohoku earthquake and tsunami,
Yes.
it's a 1 in 1,000 year event ata. So the cultural memory nila is like different in terms of like strength. So, sa fieldwork ko nun, mga tinanong namin ng mga fisher folk, lalo na especially yung mga namatayan, they said like hindi nag-evacuate yung mga fisher folk kasi they were waiting for the shore to recede. 'Di ba part ng local knowledge sa tsunami is that once a strong earthquake hits, there's a lot of like recording saying that the shoreline recedes, and then there's like this yung malaking na ugong,
Yes.
and then a white wall. But in the event of the Tohoku earthquake and tsunami, in the fieldworks that I've been to, I think the name of the place is Rikuzentakata. No, not Rikuzentakata, but rather Kirikiri. May area doon na parang sabi nila, yung mga fisher folk na nandun, hinihintay nilang mag-recede. And they didn't do it. Because like they didn't evacuate because they didn't really see yung nag-recede yung shoreline. So there were instances that actually the local memory that was passed down from one generation to another actually failed in this event kasi it's not covered by what we know currently in geosciences. Another instance of it is that, so that's looking at the past towards the future, towards the present. Another instance dito is like, for example, one of the questions that we do ask now is that disaster memory is a product of like, of course, generations and generations of like, observation. And up to this point, it really works. The question is now, what happens, let's say, with climate change impact? And how does that change and so it's like a two-faceted question. One is like a geological time scale, and another one is a what they call this wala na sa isip ko yung sa climate change impacts. Now up to this point, we don't know how like the changes would my question is like how adaptive or adaptable, I don't know how the term would that be, disaster memory is, kasi at the end, of course, it's a construct of like a community as well. So, yun lang.
Yes. Okay, so that's also important. I think earlier I was also talking about the Tohoku earthquake, in 2011. Well, I'll tell you one story then. No? When we were doing also fieldwork in Tacloban, ang kwento ng ibang mga tao doon was that, kasi the popular knowledge was that before a storm, madilim, di ba? There are clouds that are dark, yan. But the day before Yolanda, the skies were bright. So, sabi nilang ganon, baka hindi uulan kasi maliwanag naman ang kalangitan, ganon, no? So, that's now where you have to really do your recording well. Siyempre, sabi nga, we do not record events the way the monks did in medieval times in Europe. Now, hindi na daw ganun yung ka-efficient yung ating recording. But the point is, it's part of local knowledge kasi, di ba? Local knowledge, like many other forms of knowledge, they also change with time. They adapt to experiences. Therefore, yung value ng memories as being lodged in local knowledge, it has to also reflect variations through time. What's happening now is that there are extreme weather events. No? In fact, sinasabi ng mga tao na yung bagyo, hindi namin na-experience yung ganyan noon. Kwento nung time ng Undoy, kwento ng kapitbahay ko. 30 years na ako dito. Hindi pa bumaha ng ganyan, no? Never na binaha dito. Ngayon, binabaha na. So, we are experiencing events, extreme weather events now that we have not experienced before. Okay? Even the agricultural calendars, the fishing calendars of farmers and fishers had to be recalculated. So, that's the way it is in this day and times. So while of course there will be, most of the time it may work, no? Memory,
Yes.
local knowledge, it may work. There are particular incidents when it might not work. We're not saying that it's perfect. Ganun naman yun. The way other forms of knowledges are as well. Pati yung the way the Doppler would predict yung mga typhoons, hindi rin perfect. Kaya nga importante na we work on the memory to record these different events para magamit in the future in all different circumstances. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you also for sharing that.
Thanks, Ben, for jumping in the conversation.
Kailangan po ng context din kasi it's but yeah, it's definitely like different. And actually, so one of the shocking things that I got from my work here, it's parang usually like coming from UP and coming from an anthropology background, like you also have good understanding of this, but eventually magulat ka with how it changed in the future.
Yeah. Marami din namang factors dyan, and many are anthropogenic also. Yung nabasa ko din naman about that Tohoku earthquake was that there were also communities that did not heed the warnings on the rock slabs. Yun. Kaya na-devastate din sila.
Ma'am Sol, there's one
Thank you.
thing about not heeding the warnings. And then there's another thing about, but you mentioned in your slide earlier about the pain of remembrance. Paano naman yung yung mga traumatic events, yung delineation, ano yung lesson na dapat na makuha natin from those types of events at hanggang saan natin siya dapat alalahanin, i-keep sa ating memory. So, yung isang example
because memory is highly individualized, di ba? So, ano yun?
Yung isang example, yung isang example na binigay dito sa question, as context dun question ni Bernardo Arellano is yung case of pulang bahay in Bulacan, wherein the community neglects it on purpose because of haunted memories associated with the house that was used for formal comfort women during the war. So yung he wants to know about your thoughts about what lessons we can learn from this, and it being a traumatizing experience, ano yung mga pwede na nating kalimutan?
Actually, meron namang nag-aaral nitong trauma, no? In memory. So that's part of the memory studies also. But then, personally, hindi ko ipupush yan kung traumatic sa individual yan. There may be others who will be willing to talk about that, diba? So yun yung kakausapin ko. Not the ones who do not want to even bring back or recall those memories and tell me about it. Yan. Of course, kung ayaw nilang puntahan dahil neglect na nila yung pulang bahay, dahil sa na-associate yun with comfort women, again, sino yung ayaw? Yung mga taga doon mismo, no? I would assume na yung mga taga Bulacan mismo, yung mga naninirahan sa tabi noon, yung mga
Yeah, mukha kasi nine-neglect daw talaga nila yung memory nila.
Okay, oo. So, very important na malaman yan in selecting which memory to work on and which not to. So, kung hindi pa ready yung community, no, mahirap namang i-push kaagad-agad dahil baka very strong yung resistance. Meron ba may-ari ng pulang bahay na ito o has it been abandoned for the longest time?
Burns, would you have
Hi.
Yeah,
Um,
Burns.
Hi, Ma'am Sol. Magandang gabi.
Yeah, kamusta? Abandoned na ba to? Kasi marami sa Quiapo mismo yung tinitirahan na nga ng mga walang matirhan eh. But they are actually very old structures na sayang
Hi, Ma'am Sol.
nga, dilapidated na ng gusto. Ganun ba to?
Ano po, Ma'am Sol, kasi yung doon sa case ng pulang bahay sa San Ildefonso, Bulacan, ay ang nangyari nito is that you have one part of the community who likes to have it preserved kasi ito ay alaala ng alaala ng war or something, parang more like Auschwitz,
So, parang,
or yung mga ganon na to that effect, yung parang may naaalala ba sila, maalala natin yung kalupitan ng war. But on the other hand,
para siyang memorial din.
yes po, bale gusto nilang let go of that house because it is full of traumatic memories. So you have a clash of two sides wherein one wants to preserve it because they want it to become a memorial. On the other hand, they wanted it to be neglected. Actually, ang bali-balita nga po is nilipat na daw po yata siya sa isang lugar. Yun po. But yun yung parang napansin po din natin sa cultural heritage or sa heritage studies na isa ring contention is yung sino ba yung tumatanggap na this one is a good memory for us to remember, or is this one for us to commemorate, parang ganon. Kasi yun po yung mga questions din po, especially sa heritage advocacy. Ayun po, Ma'am Sol, thank you very much po.
Yeah, I get your point now. Part yun ng politics of memory kasi. Part din yun na sinasabi natin kanina that there's variance in memory, di ba? So for some of them, syempre ayaw nila ng memory ng comfort women, yung pinagdaanan ng mga comfort women before, no? But there are others who see it as a structure that's worth preserving kasi ito ay palatandaan ng ating pinagdaanan na paghihirap lalo na nung panahon ng Hapon. It's a very, ano tawag dito? Medyo delikadong i-tread na ground. You'll have to do a lot of research and kailangan ng info dissemination. Kailangan din malaman kung ano ba kung gaano kalakas yung influence ng iba't ibang grupo, di ba?
Opo.
In trying to remember that. Parang I'll give you an example, itong martial law. Yan. How do we remember martial law ba? Do we remember martial law as a period of oppression, suppression, or surprising that I hear from the very young, yung mga millennials na tinatawag ngayon, even ano ba tawag mo doon after the millennials generation?
Gen Z po.
Gen Z.
Na sabi nila, maganda daw nung panahon na yon, very orderly, very so iba yung kanilang memory nung time na yon. Of course, they were not alive at that time. Iba din yung memory ko na dumaan ako dun sa period na yon, no? So that's part of the politics of memory. I cannot give you a definite answer kung yes or no kaagad ito. I'll do more. I have to gather more data to be able to answer your question. But definitely this is a very good point of study for the politics of memory.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Dan.
And then, Ma'am Sol, we have just one last question, and I think this is a good one to really give a conclusion of the whole topic
Okay.
that we have. So, this is a question from Timothy James Cipriano. In what ways are cultural memories of disaster important for disaster risk reduction practices?
Okay, important for DRR practice. Ito yun, ano? Yung last
Yes,
point.
ma'am. The last one in the
I
chat
think this
box.
has been the point of the entire lecture. We've been discussing that cultural memories are repositories of, cultural memories can evoke positive action, collective action for disaster risk reduction, ganyan. So I gave the example at the very start of Yolanda, wherein one of our informants was worried. He was concerned na baka the future generations will have no memory of Yolanda and they will go back to their complacent ways. See? So now, at least, sinasabi nila na fresh pa sa minds nila yung memory ng experience nila, no? With Yolanda. And so, pag sinabi ng gobyerno na bakwet sila. Kasi alam nila na mahalaga yon, di ba? Pero yung mga bata, yung mga hindi nakaranas ng Yolanda, hindi nila alam kung magiging kasing gasig sila sa pagsunod sa mga warnings whenever there's an incoming big hazard. So, natatakot sila dyan. So, ganon kahalaga yung memories of disaster or even memory in general for disaster risk reduction. Itong ating mga cultural memories, we have lessons lodged in local knowledge. May marami tayong examples na binigay kanina, di ba? Yung tungkol sa animal behavior, the positions of the constellations, yung ating mga legends na warn us, no, of disasters. So ito ay nakapaloob dito yung mga lessons na pinapasa sa atin ng ating mga ninuno, ating lahi. So importante ito sa atin dahil nagagamit natin ito sa ngayon, no, sa pagharap sa mga sakuna.
Ayan, marami pong salamat, Ma'am Sol. We really learned a lot from you this afternoon. And to show our appreciation, the PGS would be giving a certificate to our speaker for sharing yung mga valuable insights niya and expertise. So, the certificate of appreciation is given to Soledad Natalia Dalisay. For sharing her valuable insights and expertise as virtual resource speaker for the talk, Cultural Memory for Disaster Risk Reduction as part of the Philippine Geographical Society Lecture Series 2021 held on May 28. Signed Joseph Palis, Yanni Lopez, and Emmanuel Garcia. Ayan. Meron pong reaction button dito sa ating Zoom that you can use to show our appreciation to Ma'am Dalisay.
Thank you as well to the Philippine Geographical Society and the Department of Geography for putting your trust in me, inviting me to speak about a topic that's very close to my heart, which is, of course, disaster. And I hope to continue working with the geographers of the Philippines in future research projects.
Ayan. So thank you once again, Professor Dalisay, for sharing your research. And with that, we are at the end of our program. I would like to call Professor Joseph Palis, the convener of this lecture series, to give the closing remarks.
Thank you very much, Kathy. Thank you very much, Sol. I don't know where to begin. It's such a wonderful talk and highly detailed and exciting in very different ways. Maybe I took some notes, for you while I was listening to your talk, but mostly I would like to say that from the prism of emotional geography, which including yourself, many of us are actually studying. This is a very not only innovative type of research, but also a rather, if I may use a term related to it, a rather heartbreaking one because it is a travel to painful memories, victorious recollections, and everything in between. I thought some of the things that really resonated with me was your discussion of the Our Lady of Sasay and Nuestra Senora Salvacion, which may have some Afro-Caribbean parallel with Yemanja, right? There's this idea of the goddess of the water in their case, and also how it became the purveyor of information for preparation of the community to disaster. Local knowledges, of course. There was also this discussion about ethnoscience, which I think some of us were actually chatting about this, about how science may look at things differently from local knowledge, but there might be a space or a meeting point with which the scientists and people in the community who may not have the access to the same kind of educational resources that some of these scientists are may actually meet and discuss. And also, I like that part of the living heritage too, and the intangible culture. I know that we are presenting something like a paper related to that, related to folklore also. And finally, this question about what do we commemorate really, and who is or who are the cultural arbiters that decide which memory is more important than the others. And I think maybe the way to look at it is not to look at it as only one kind of memory, but in several others. When you talk about pluriverse and multiplicities, then maybe that's a way of bringing different kinds of memories uh, to the fore, as you call it. So thank you very much for that wonderful, wonderful talk, and I'm sure we'll be hearing more about this as many of us are studying the intersection of memory studies and DRR. Thank you. And yeah, in June, there will be a talk by one of our lecturers in the UP Department of Geography, who's also based at the World Food Program. His name is Juanito Berja, aka Noe Berja, as he is popularly known. That's going to be on the 26th at 2 p.m. And it's about food security. He will have a much funkier title than this one. And also, just to give you a sense that July until about November, we have a series of PGS lectures, even when the semester is on hiatus. And that's because we wanted to provide examples also of studies within the Philippines, or in the case of geographers that we invite who talk about how they apply geography outside of the academe. So hope to see you for the June 26th at least and the succeeding ones.
Thank you, Sir Joseph. And of course, thank you to all our attendees this evening for your participation in the PGS lecture series. If you are interested to become a member of the PGS, the organization has an open call for membership. For more information, please go to the PGS website, www.phgeographicalsociety.org. The PGS Lecture Series is an ongoing event, as was mentioned by Sir Palis. And so we would like to request for your feedback to help us prepare and improve our future events. Kindly answer the short survey after this session. The link will be posted in the chat box for your reference. And to watch previous sessions of the PGS lecture series, please go to the YouTube channel of the UP Diliman Department of Geography. The recorded lecture for this particular session will also be posted in the same channel. And before we end this online meeting, we would like to request our participants for a group photo. Kindly turn on your video cameras.
Okay, everyone, at the count of 3. Okay. Okay, ready? Cultural memory in 3. 1, 2, 3. Okay, let's go to the next panel. Okay, let me just go to the next panel. Okay, ready? Okay, everyone. 1, 2, 3. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. And thank you for attending the PGS lecture series on cultural memory for disaster risk reduction. We look forward to your attendance in succeeding sessions in the upcoming months. Have a wonderful evening and enjoy the weekend.
Happy weekend.
Weekend. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Ma'am Sol.
Thank you, Ma'am Sol.
Thank you po. Salamat, Sol.